My son, my wife, and my daughter raised their hands and voted that I wouldn't be a family member anymore. At 62, they thought I was finished, invisible. But they forgot one thing: shadows see everything. I waited, silent, until the day they realized I was never truly gone. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you. My name is David. I am 62 years old. I've lived through broken bones, layoffs, and even the kind of loneliness that creeps in when you're the last man standing after all your friends have faded away. But nothing in my 62 years prepared me for the night my own family turned into my jury. We weren't in a courtroom. We weren't in a church. We weren't even in some dramatic setting like people imagine when betrayal comes. No, it happened in the dining room of the house I built with my own 2 hands. The same table where I once cut birthday cakes with shaky hands because my kids insisted I take the first slice. The same table where Mary and I signed mortgage papers with sweaty palms because we were young and scared but hopeful. That table turned into an execution chamber. Mary, my wife, 52 now, but still carrying herself with that sharp elegance that once stole my breath, sat at the head of the table. The head. Always the head. She used to smile when she sat there, like a proud queen of a little kingdom we built together. But that night, her face was blank. Cold. Like she'd already carved me out of her heart days ago. On her left, Sarah, my 20-year-old daughter, the little girl I once taught how to ride a bike, now scrolling on her phone with long acrylic nails tapping the glass. She didn't even look up until Mary spoke. When she did, she looked at me not with love, not with patience, but with the kind of annoyance you reserve for a stranger who just bumped your shoulder on the subway. Next to her sat Ethan, my 22-year-old son. My boy, who once clung to me when thunderstorms shook the roof, now leaned back with that lazy confidence, arms crossed, like a man who thought he'd already won. I used to imagine the day Ethan would sit across from me as an equal, maybe over a drink, talking about his dreams, his fears, his mistakes. Instead, he sat there that night like a judge waiting to hand down a sentence. Mary cleared her throat. That sound, oh, how I used to fear it. It was her way of signaling that she had made a decision and the rest of us would just have to catch up. When she did it that night, it was different. It carried the weight of something final. She said it plainly. The family had been talking, and it was decided that maybe it was best if I stepped aside. Stepped aside. Those were the words. Not divorced, not separated, not retired. No. Stepped aside. Like I was some old piece of furniture blocking their view of the television. Sarah didn't hesitate. She raised her hand like she was in class volunteering to answer a question she already knew. Ethan smirked and followed, his arm shooting up as though he'd been waiting for the moment. And then Mary. My wife. My partner of almost 4 decades. The woman who once promised for better or for worse. She raised her hand last. Slowly, but without hesitation. 3 hands in the air. None for me. A unanimous vote. I was no longer a family member. The silence that followed was deafening. My ears rang with it. My throat dried up. For a second, I wondered if this was some twisted prank. Maybe Ethan would laugh, Sarah would roll her eyes, and Mary would smile and say it was all a joke. But their faces were stone. Not a flicker of doubt. Not a trace of guilt. Do you know what it feels like to be erased while you're still alive? It's like watching your own obituary printed while your heart still beats. I wanted to stand up, to scream, to pound my fists on the table. But instead, I sat frozen, staring at the 3 people I had lived my entire life for. Ethan looked away, fiddling with his watch. Sarah went back to her phone as if raising her hand to exile me was no more important than liking a photo on social media. And Mary. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. She just stared at the wall, her lips pressed so tight together it looked painful. I thought about everything in that moment. The time Ethan broke his leg at 12 and I carried him on my back for 3 blocks to the hospital because the car wouldn't start. The time Sarah failed her first driving test and cried into my chest while I told her failing once didn't make her a failure. The time Mary lost her job, and I worked 3 extra shifts just to keep the mortgage paid until she got back on her feet. All those moments, all that sacrifice, evaporated with 3 raised hands. That night, I went to bed in silence. I didn't fight. I didn't plead. I didn't demand an explanation. I just lay there, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. Mary slid under the covers beside me, her back turned, her breathing steady, as if nothing had happened. Sarah blasted music in her room, laughing on the phone with a friend. Ethan shouted at his game console, swearing at strangers online. And me. I lay there like a ghost already. But here's the thing about ghosts: people forget about them, ignore them, pretend they aren't there. Until the ghost decides to stop being silent. Until the ghost decides to haunt. That night, I realized something very simple. They thought they had buried me alive. But they didn't know that I've spent 62 years learning patience, learning silence, learning how to take pain and swallow it whole. What they didn't realize was that I'd spit it back out when the time was right. I wasn't dead. I wasn't gone. I wasn't erased. Not yet. The morning after the vote, the house didn't look different. The sun still came through the curtains, spilling golden stripes on the living room floor. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. The sound of footsteps padded on the staircase. From the outside, you'd think it was an ordinary day in an ordinary house. But inside me, everything had changed. Silence. That's what greeted me when I walked into the kitchen. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of dismissal. The kind where people hear you, but act like you're nothing but background noise. Mary stood at the counter, stirring her coffee. Not once did her eyes meet mine. Her hair, streaked with silver now, was pulled back in a neat bun, and her lips were drawn tight, like speaking to me would crack them. She had perfected the art of ignoring me. You'd think after 38 years of marriage, she would at least flinch when I walked in. She didn't. Ethan sat at the table, scrolling on his phone, earbuds in, nodding along to whatever song was blaring in his ears. 22 years old, my son, my blood, my boy I once cradled when he was smaller than my forearm. He didn't even glance up. To him, I wasn't even worth pausing his playlist. Sarah, only 20, sat across from him, lazily twirling a spoon in her cereal. She had a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth, like she knew a secret and was enjoying it. When she did look at me, it wasn't the look a daughter gives a father. It was the look a stranger gives a man asking for spare change. I poured myself coffee. The sound of the liquid hitting the cup seemed loud in that tense kitchen. Nobody offered me cream. Nobody asked if I wanted toast. Nobody even moved. It was as though I were a ghost haunting the house I had built. The strangest part? They didn't even need to say anything. Their silence spoke volumes. A silence that told me, you don't matter here anymore. I sat down at the edge of the table. The chair creaked under my weight, and Sarah's eyes darted up for half a second, annoyed by the sound. Ethan just shifted his phone closer to his face. Mary. She kept stirring her coffee like she was waiting for me to disappear. In that moment, I understood something painful. They hadn't voted me out as a joke. This was their reality now. I was out, and they were living as if I no longer existed. 4 days, it was the same. Meals without a plate for me. Conversations whispered in corners, laughter echoing down the hall, but never directed my way. They spoke around me, through me, above me, but never to me. I tried, once or twice, to add a word into their conversations. Sarah rolled her eyes. Ethan sighed like I was wasting oxygen. Mary would excuse herself, as if she suddenly remembered something important. Do you know what it feels like to be erased in slow motion? It's worse than a quick death. A quick death, at least, is merciful. But this was torture. Watching my own family practice life without me, like I was some rehearsal actor no longer needed when the real play began. At night, I lay in bed beside Mary. I could hear her breathing, steady, calm, as though nothing weighed on her chest. She hadn't touched me in months. She used to curl into me at night, used to rest her head on my shoulder. Now, she turned away, taking all her warmth with her. Sometimes, I'd stare at the back of her head and wonder if she even remembered the girl she was when we first met. The girl who told me she'd follow me through fire. Apparently, she just forgot to mention she'd be the one holding the match. One evening, I sat in the living room, watching a rerun of an old show. The sound of Sarah's laughter rang out from the kitchen. She was telling Ethan something funny, her voice full of life. For a split second, I imagined she'd come running into the room, plop down beside me, and tell me all about her day like she used to when she was 12. But she didn't. She just kept laughing, and I realized I wasn't included in her joy anymore. The silence wasn't just in their words. It was in the absence of me in their lives. They didn't ask where I went. They didn't care when I came back. I could have dropped dead in the hallway, and the only thing they'd complain about would be the inconvenience of moving my body out of their way. That silence pressed on me, heavy as a stone on my chest. I carried it with me everywhere. When I went for walks, when I ate alone, when I sat in my own chair in the living room, I felt like an intruder in my own life. But here's the thing about silence, it gives you space to think. And thinking can be dangerous. At first, my thoughts were like broken glass. Memories of the past cutting me open again and again. The day Ethan was born, his tiny fingers gripping mine. The day Sarah won her first medal, running straight into my arms. The nights Mary and I stayed up late, planning our future, whispering dreams into the darkness. All of it felt like it had been thrown into a fire. But then, my thoughts began to shift. That silence became less of a weight and more of a forge. While they ignored me, while they dismissed me, while they stripped me of dignity, I started to realize something. They had underestimated me. They thought at 62 I was finished. They thought I'd just wither away, shrivel into nothing, and let them live their lives without consequence. They thought I'd drown quietly. But they forgot one thing. Silence doesn't just kill. Silence sharpens. And while they carried on as if I didn't exist, I sat in that silence, sharpening myself into something they'd never see coming. The house carries my fingerprints even when the dust hides them. A picture frame that hangs a little crooked because I put it up in a hurry before guests arrived. A dent in the banister from when a small boy raced a toy truck down the stairs and I caught it with my elbow. A faint stain on the kitchen ceiling where steam from 1,000 pots of soup went up and stuck around like old stories. Everywhere I look, there is proof that I was here, proof that I tried, proof that I built a life with my own 2 hands. The only people who seem blind to it are the 3 who benefited the most. I run a cloth across the dining table and a memory wakes up. Ethan once sat there, a skinny 12-year-old with a cast up to his knee because he had decided he could fly off the porch steps. The car would not start that night, and the rain was coming down sideways. I wrapped his foot in a garbage bag, hoisted him on my back, and carried him 3 blocks to the clinic. The nurse said I looked like I had swum through a storm, and she was not wrong. The coffee in the waiting room tasted like boiled socks, and still I drank it because my eyes would not stay open. Ethan slept on my shoulder, his breath warm, his trust warmer. He does not remember that night now. I do. My back remembers too. Near the hallway, the wall shows a set of faint pencil lines, one above the other. That was the growth chart. Sarah insisted on standing tall in her socks while I balanced a book on her head and marked the wall. She would jump after each mark, claiming she had grown in that 1 second. She cried the day a landlord told us to repaint the wall before moving. I copied the lines on paper and brought them here in my pocket, smoothing the paper out like a map we would still need. The paper is folded in a box under my bed. She would not know where to look for it, and I doubt she would try. The living room rug hides a loose floorboard. Under it, there was once a showbox full of receipts, bus tickets, and scraps of paper where Mary and I wrote numbers and plans. We counted every coin in those days, learned how to turn small into enough. Mary lost a job once, and I picked up extra shifts. The house smelled like machine oil because it clung to my clothes and hair. Mary hated that smell. Later, when she went back to school, I learned to love the taste of cheap instant noodles because that is what we could afford. She said I would look back and call those days romantic. I call them proof. People can love without wine if they have hope. There is a photograph in the hallway, a faded one from a carnival. Sarah sits on my shoulders holding a stuffed bear almost bigger than she is. Ethan stands next to us, face painted like a tiger, hands sticky from cotton candy. Mary stands behind the camera, her laugh frozen as a blur in the way the picture is slightly crooked. On the back of that photo, I once wrote a list: save for Sarah's braces, save for Ethan's camp, fix the leaking roof, take Mary somewhere with a beach and nothing to do for 3 days. I managed the first 3. The beach never happened. Life kept sending bills instead of postcards. I pass the kitchen and see the counter where I taught both kids how to line up their homework in small piles. Math on the left, reading in the middle, the rest on the right. Ethan did not like reading. I made it a game. He read 1 page. I told him I would do 10 push-ups. He read a second page. I added 10 more. He kept going to see if he could break me. I kept going to show him I could not be broken. The next day he read without the push-ups, and I pretended not to feel a little sad that my trick was no longer needed. A knife nick on the cutting board takes me to a night Mary came home with eyes that looked like she had been walking through wind. She said she was unsure of everything. I told her uncertainty can be a sign that you are growing, like the ache in the legs of a child who wakes taller. I turned onions into a stew that filled the house with a smell that made us think we were richer than we were. She slept early that night. I sat in the living room and built a plan out of quiet. Mary found her feet again, smarter and stronger. I sat on the side and clapped where no one could see. The garage is a museum of my stubbornness. Shelves I built from leftover planks. Jars of screws labeled with tape and fading marker. A workbench that still carries the shape of my hands in the worn wood. One winter, the heater died and money was already promised to other emergencies. I read a manual like it was a mystery novel and took the heater apart. The living room turned into a warm cave 2 hours later. Sarah cheered and asked if I was a wizard. I said I was a father. That was the only magic I ever wanted. On the back porch, the boards bow a little under my shoes. I remember putting that deck together after a storm tore the old one to pieces. Ethan was small and eager to help. He kept handing me the wrong nails and smiling like he had solved a puzzle. We laughed until the sky turned the color of a bruise. That deck became a stage for birthday candles, summer dinners, and a few awkward teenage parties where I pretended not to hear things for the sake of peace. Now it carries me alone, and the boards groan like they know how heavy silence can be. I walk past Sarah's room and remember a ballet recital where the satin ribbon on her shoe snapped 5 minutes before she went on the stage. The backstage smelled like sweat and hairspray. I tied the ribbon with careful hands and told her the knot would hold. She stepped on stage and moved like someone who had never known fear. When she finished, she looked toward the crowd without really seeing anyone, then toward the wings where she knew I stood. That look once meant everything to me. Now, when she looks at me, it is only to check if I will step aside faster. I think of Ethan again, older now, talking about investments and risk, using words he learned from videos made by people who never knew what it meant to be truly broke. He called me old-fashioned once, waved away my advice with a flick of his wrist like he was brushing crumbs from a table. I did not argue. I never liked fighting wind. I only asked him one question. I asked if he remembered how to tell apart a risk you take to grow and a risk you take to show off. He laughed. I took that laugh and stored it. Some sounds are not worth throwing away. Then there is Mary at 52, hard edges where there used to be soft ones. She stands in the kitchen some nights, phone face down, smile too slow to arrive when I enter. We used to pass each other in small ways that meant everything. The graze of a hand when giving a plate. The shared joke no one else would get. The glance that asked a question and the nod that answered it. People think big love lives in grand gestures. I learned it lives in these small ones, in the ordinary yes that repeats until it builds a life. When the small things vanish, the roof goes next, then the walls. Then you are standing in a field holding a door handle with no door. I stack these memories like bricks. Not to build a shrine. I am past worship. I am building a ledger. It is a habit from the years when numbers and lists were the only way to stay afloat. Debit on one side, credit on the other. What I gave. What they took. What they returned. I am not surprised to see the columns fail to match. That is not bitterness speaking. That is arithmetic. I try to be fair even inside my own head. I know I made mistakes. I missed a school play once because my boss kept me late and I did not argue hard enough. I told Ethan to toughen up when maybe I should have said I hear you. I told Sarah to be careful with her heart, and I sounded like a man who was afraid of the world rather than a man who trusted her strength. I apologized in small ways over the years. An extra hour at the park. A sandwich left on a desk during exams. A surprise day off to watch a movie that had no explosions. I never believed apologies fixed everything. I believed they added weight to the right side of the scale. All these memories, and still their vote came down like a gavel. I turned this thought over and over. Did they forget, or did they decide remembering me cost more than ignoring me? Forgetting is easy when you have enough noise in your pocket and enough people telling you that the old ways are holding you back. Remembering takes work. It takes time. It takes humility. None of those are fashionable. The hurt comes in waves, but the water is different now. In the beginning, it was cold and shocked me breathless. Now it runs steady and predictable. I can stand up in it. I can plant my feet. The past does not drown me. It teaches me how to breathe when the air is thin. I go back to the dining table, the same table that hosted my erasure. I run a hand over the wood. I think about the kind of man I wanted to be when I first became a father at 40. Patient. Strong. Quiet when quiet was needed. Loud when danger required volume. I did not always hit the mark. But I stayed. I did not step aside. They decided for me. And in that choice, they told me something important. They told me what they value. I put the cloth down. I make tea with the slow care of a watchmaker. When the steam rises, I catch my reflection in the window. There is grey in my beard and lines on my face that were not there last year. The eyes are the same, though. A little tired, yes. But steady. My father used to say a steady gaze is a form of mercy. It keeps you from acting before you think. It keeps you from letting rage do the math. I hold my own eyes for a moment and make a decision that does not need fireworks. I will not chase their memory of me. I will not beg them to pick it up, dust it, and hang it back on the wall. I will keep my own record. I will go quiet where I used to explain. I will watch the small things. The late nights. The closed doors. The hurried whispers. I will learn the shape of their lives the way a carpenter learns wood grain, not to admire but to cut clean. They trusted me to be invisible. I can do that. I have practiced. The difference now is simple. Before, I was invisible and loyal. Now, I will be invisible and precise. The memories they forgot used to be my soft place. Tonight, they become my blueprint. It's funny how some moments arrive quietly but still leave scars louder than screams. My breaking point didn't come with fists on the table, or with me shouting into the void of their cold faces. It came on an ordinary evening, the kind of evening that blends with all the others. The kind that looks harmless until it isn't. Dinner was ready. Mary, 52, moved around the kitchen with her back to me, scraping food onto 3 plates. Not 4. 3. She didn't even hesitate. She set the plates down in front of Ethan and Sarah, slid into her own chair, and began eating without a word. No plate for me. Not even a gesture of forgetting. She didn't forget. She chose. I sat there, stubborn, pulling out the chair I had pulled out for decades. The wood groaned, like it understood what was about to happen before I did. The table, once our place of laughter and mess, now looked like a courtroom exhibit. Ethan, 22, didn't glance at me. His fork clinked on the plate as if my presence was no different from the hum of the fridge. Sarah, 20, scrolled on her phone with one hand while eating with the other, the glow of the screen lighting her face more than the candles on her last birthday ever had. I reached across the table for the bread basket, just a small motion, the kind I'd done thousands of times before. Sarah's eyes snapped up for the briefest moment, sharp and accusing, like I'd stolen from her. Ethan muttered under his breath, a sound halfway between a laugh and a grunt, before pushing his chair back. He grabbed his plate and walked into the living room. Sarah followed. Mary didn't stop them. She didn't even look at me. That was it. Not a fight. Not a slap. Not a curse. Just indifference. And somehow, that indifference cut deeper than any knife. I sat there with my hand still hovering near the bread, my knuckles pale from how hard I gripped the basket. For years, I had carried these people. For years, I had been their spine when their own bent. And now, my own family acted like I was nothing but dead weight. A burden. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't argue. I just watched. Watched Mary pretending her food tasted normal while the silence between us choked the room. Watched Ethan and Sarah laugh faintly from the living room, their voices muffled but sharp enough to remind me I wasn't invited into their joy. When Mary finally cleared the plates, she walked past me without a glance, scraping leftovers into the trash like it was muscle memory. That sound, the scrape of food sliding into a bin, burned into my ears. Because that's what I was to them now. Leftovers. I went to the living room later and sat in my old chair. The same chair where I once read bedtime stories. Where Ethan climbed onto my lap with toy cars. Where Sarah fell asleep against my chest after watching cartoons. That chair used to mean something. But as I sat there now, the three of them on the couch whispering, laughing, scrolling through their shiny screens, I realized something brutal. I wasn't part of the picture anymore. I wasn't even part of the furniture. I was just the shadow sitting in the corner, tolerated but unseen. At 62, that was the moment I broke. Not into pieces. No. Into something sharper. Something more dangerous. Because when you take away a man's dignity, his presence, his family, you leave him with nothing but time. And time, in the hands of someone invisible, can be turned into a weapon. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam the door. I smiled. The kind of smile that comes not from joy, but from a bitter, icy clarity. They thought I was finished. They thought I was weak, too old to matter. They thought they'd erased me. What they didn't realize was that I had been paying attention. I had been watching. And if there's one thing life has taught me, it's this: the longer you wait, the sharper your strike. That night, I lay in bed and didn't close my eyes. Mary's back was turned to me, her steady breathing almost cruel in its calmness. I stared into the dark, and in that silence, I made myself a promise. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not fight for scraps of affection. No. I would make them remember me in a way they could never erase. Revenge doesn't start with fireworks. It doesn't roar into life with shouting or fists on the table. No, it starts quiet. It starts with silence, patience, and watching. If they wanted me to be invisible, then fine, I would be invisible. But while they ignored me, I would see everything. And trust me, I saw plenty. I began with Mary. 52, my wife, the woman who once swore to hold my hand through every storm. She had grown skilled at keeping her phone close, flipping it face down every time I entered the room. Her late work meetings had multiplied. She dressed sharper than usual, sprayed on perfume before leaving the house, and smiled at her reflection in the mirror in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years. It doesn't take a genius to see the cracks. When she thought I wasn't looking, she typed too fast, her thumbs dancing over the screen like a teenager in love. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confronting would give her the power to lie. Instead, I memorized the patterns. What time she left. How long she stayed gone. What excuses she repeated. If she thought I was too old and blind to notice, she was dead wrong. Then there was Ethan. 22, my son, so sure of himself. He strutted around the house with his phone glued to his hand, bragging to Sarah about his latest big investment. Crypto, stocks, flashy schemes that promised the moon. He was careless, too eager to look rich before he was wise. I watched him pacing the hallway at night, whispering into the phone, trying to convince someone, or maybe himself, that he knew what he was doing. I caught the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted when Mary asked him how things were going. He was drowning, and pride was pulling him under. I didn't have to push him. He was already knee-deep in quicksand. All I had to do was wait. And Sarah. My little girl. 20 now, but still with the impulsive heart of a teenager who thinks tomorrow is guaranteed. She lived like money grew on trees in the backyard. Clothes piled high in her closet, unopened boxes stacked in her room from all-night online shopping sprees. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't want anyone else to read. I caught her once, whispering into the phone, voice trembling, pacing like a cornered animal. She owed people. Friends. Maybe strangers. She was borrowing, promising to pay back with money she didn't have. A web of lies for a girl too young to know that webs are meant to trap the spider, not the fly. Each of them carried secrets. And secrets, if you listen closely enough, whisper louder than truths. The beauty of being invisible is that people stop guarding themselves around you. They think you're too small to notice, too unimportant to matter. They laugh louder, they whisper more openly, they leave trails without fear of being followed. Mary's perfume lingered in the hallway longer than her excuses did. Ethan's voice grew louder when he thought I was asleep in my chair. Sarah left receipts on the counter, bills crumpled in her pockets, and messages half hidden on her screen. They thought I was gone. But I was everywhere. I became a shadow in my own home, collecting every slip, every secret, every hidden fracture. I didn't need to raise my voice or slam my fists. I just needed to be patient. Revenge is a meal best served cold, but I wasn't just going to serve it cold. I was going to serve it frozen, carved into ice, sharp enough to cut. At night, when the house fell quiet, I sat in the living room and thought about the years I'd given. I thought about how Mary once held my hand under the table when bills stacked higher than paychecks. How Ethan once cried into my chest when he failed a test and thought his life was ruined. How Sarah once begged me to chase away monsters under her bed, trusting that I had the power to banish anything. They had forgotten those versions of me. But I hadn't. I didn't want their love anymore. Love, after all, is useless when it's counterfeit. What I wanted was something stronger. I wanted them to feel what I felt when those 3 hands rose into the air and erased me. That cold humiliation. That quiet death. But to do that, I had to be smarter. I had to wait. I had to dig deeper. And so, I watched. I collected. I waited. And with each passing day, with each new secret tucked into my pocket, I felt less like a broken man and more like something else. Something they had created with their cruelty. A shadow. A hunter. A storm they wouldn't see coming until it tore through everything they thought was safe. They thought they had silenced me. What they didn't know was that silence makes a man dangerous. Every storm begins with a drop. Just one. Silent. Unnoticed. That's how revenge works too. You don't arrive like thunder. You start with a whisper, a ripple no one pays attention to, until the flood drowns them. For weeks I carried their secrets like coins in my pocket, waiting for the right one to spend. And Sarah's recklessness offered me the first opportunity. She was drowning in debts, clinging to shallow promises and fake confidence. Money slipped through her hands like water, and instead of fixing the leak, she drilled more holes. I could see it in her eyes every time her phone buzzed, fear wrapped in eyeliner. One evening, she came home late. I was in my chair, pretending to nap, the glow of the TV flickering across the room. She stomped through the hallway, heels clicking sharp against the floor, her voice low and sharp on the phone. Words like "I'll get it" and "just give me time" sliced through the silence. She slipped into her room and shut the door, but not before I caught the tremble in her hand. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I already knew enough. Sarah owed money to a so-called friend, the kind who lent cash not out of kindness but out of greed, waiting to twist the knife when the time was right. She thought she could hide it, thought she could juggle her little lies until things magically worked out. But lies are like balloons. You can only hold so many before they start slipping from your hands. I decided to loosen her grip. The next day, I made a simple call. Not to her, of course. To her friend. A quiet voice, polite, nothing suspicious. I reminded him, firmly, that Sarah was falling behind. That maybe he should ask for his money sooner rather than later, before she wasted more of his time. I didn't threaten. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The seed was planted. That night, the storm broke. Sarah came bursting into the kitchen, eyes red, mascara streaked down her cheeks, her phone clutched in her trembling hand. "He wants it back now," she muttered, pacing like a caged animal. Ethan looked up from his laptop, annoyed, and Mary frowned but said nothing. Sarah slammed her fist on the table, muttering about betrayal, about how people couldn't be trusted. I sat quietly at the end of the table, sipping my tea. The bitterness rolled over my tongue like victory. No one looked at me. They didn't think I had anything to do with it. Why would they? I was invisible. A ghost in my own home. And yet, I had pulled the first thread, and already the fabric was unraveling. Ethan mocked her, telling her she should have been smarter. Sarah snapped back, her voice shrill, her hands flailing. Mary tried to calm them, but her tone was hollow, distracted. And me. I sat there, calm, steady, watching the cracks widen. That was the beauty of it. I didn't have to raise a hand. All I had to do was push one tiny domino, and the rest fell on their own. Later that night, I heard Sarah crying in her room. I leaned against the wall, listening to the muffled sobs. Once, long ago, I would have gone in, wrapped her in my arms, and told her we'd figure it out together. But that man was dead, the one they voted out of the family. Now, I listened with cold patience. Her pain wasn't mine to carry anymore. It was a seed growing roots that would twist their way through the foundation of everything they thought was safe. I went to bed that night with a strange calmness. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. They didn't know it, but I was in the room with them again, not as the father, not as the husband, but as the storm. Sarah's unraveling was just the beginning. Ethan was next. His arrogance was ripe for picking. And Mary, my once beloved Mary, she had no idea the shadows she thought she kept hidden were already standing at her doorstep, waiting to swallow her whole. One seed planted. A forest of ruin to come. The first seed took root faster than I expected. Sarah's debt became a daily storm cloud, rolling in at breakfast, hovering through lunch, pouring down by dinner. She paced rooms like a traveller who lost a map, snapping at Ethan, begging cold space from Mary, slamming doors with the rhythm of a metronome set to panic. The house changed temperature. Not warm. Not cool. Humid with fear. Perfect weather for mold to bloom in old corners. I stayed small. I moved like smoke. I learned that if I breathed too loudly, Mary's shoulders stiffened and Ethan's jaw locked. So I made my presence a rumor. I let them forget I was listening. Mary's late nights became later. She dressed like victory, sharp lines and clean perfume, and left the house with keys that jingled like an anthem. She returned with silence that wore a new face. The mask of someone spinning a plate over a pit. Her phone lived face down on the counter, pulse flashing like a heartbeat. Sometimes she smiled at nothing. Sometimes she stared at the wall like it had just told her a secret. I did not need passwords. Time is better than any code. Time shows patterns. Thursday nights stretched longer. Saturday mornings started with hushed calls. A name drifted through the air more than once, caught on the edge of a calendar reminder that lit the kitchen tablet before the screen went dark. The name was familiar, a colleague from her firm who loved ambitious projects and other people's applause. I remembered him shaking my hand at a holiday party years ago, eyes sliding past me to find bigger fish. People like that never imagine the water remembers their weight. I collected harmless things that added up to harm. A receipt left in a coat pocket from a restaurant she never visited with us. A rideshare charge that began 2 blocks from the office and ended nowhere near our house. A project code name written on a sticky note that stuck itself to the back of the mail. None of it sang on its own. A choir, though, is made of single voices. I mailed a small envelope one Monday afternoon. Plain paper. Neat printing. No drama. Inside was a polite summary sent to the compliance office at Mary's firm. Unusual meetings tied to a client's competitor, dates that matched sensitive milestones, a colleague's name appearing often outside ordinary hours. No accusations. Only curiosity in a clean font. Curiosity makes professionals nervous. Nervous people open doors they hope to keep shut. By Wednesday, Mary's voice changed. Not louder. Thinner, like a string pulled tight. The firm had questions. She took a call in the laundry room and whispered the firm's favorite words for worry: review, policy, optics. I kept folding towels like a patient hospital volunteer. She walked past me without seeing that the corners matched. While Mary's plate wobbled, Ethan decided the universe owed him a win. Arrogance always believes in a coming miracle. He marched from room to room with a laptop like a flag, talking about charts and timing and how this time was different. He began waking earlier than his alarm and sleeping later than his common sense. The living room glowed with midnight screens. The kitchen hummed with pre-dawn coffee that tasted of regret. He had leverage, a word he loved to say because it sounded like power. Leverage is only a polite term for borrowed certainty. The platform he used had banners that promised rockets and moons. I watched him tap numbers that looked like ladders. Ladders do not care if you are climbing or falling. I did not short his dreams. I did not steal his passwords. I did something softer. I took away the cushion he did not even know he had. Years ago, to protect our family from emergencies, I built a quiet line of credit behind the checking account, a safety net only I managed and no one thanked. When a bill outran a paycheck, the net caught it and made our life look seamless. I dissolved that net with a single visit to a branch, smiling at a teller who called me sir and verified my name on documents I had signed before Ethan had grown tall enough to reach light switches. The closure required no fanfare. Just a pen and a steady hand. 2 days later, Ethan triggered a transfer on his phone and discovered the account suddenly took offense. The screen spit back a refusal couched in polite words. Polite refusals crush loudly. He tried again, faster, louder, and then he called someone with a voice he saved for people he wanted something from. His posture shifted from king to debt collector in 5 minutes. He walked tight circles in the kitchen, talked about verification, about a hold he did not understand, about a small window closing on a big chance. That window was imaginary. The hold was not. I made soup and let the onions tell him nothing. His margin call arrived later that afternoon, a message wrapped in warning colors. He stared at it so long I thought he had frozen. Then he moved in bursts, plugging holes in a boat with paper towels. He begged Mary for a short-term rescue. She did not answer her phone. She was busy answering other people with better titles. Sarah watched her brother's disaster with the expression of someone who recognizes a tune and hates the chorus. She asked him a question shaped like concern but framed like a jab. He snapped back with the grace of a trapped animal. They tore each other's pride into ribbons on the kitchen floor. I salted my soup. While Ethan unraveled, Mary's review turned into a meeting. Her firm sent a note that carried the smell of a storm cellar, brief, serious, immediate. She left the house with a jacket that did not match the weather. She returned with eyes that did not match her voice. She told Ethan to clean up his mess and told Sarah to act like an adult and told the air she had it under control. People who have it under control do not repeat that sentence to 3 separate rooms. The next morning, I mailed a second envelope. Not to her firm this time. To a client whose logo had sat on mugs in our kitchen for years. Another tidy summary. Same measured tone. Timelines lined up with board decisions. Meeting locations that made a pattern if you dared connect dots. I did not ask them to act. Clients do not like to feel foolish. They act without being asked. By the weekend, Mary's phone became a metronome. Every call ended with her looking older in 2-minute increments. The elegance remained, but the shoulders drooped in ways clothes could not hide. She began checking windows like someone might be watching. Someone was me. From the same chair where I once taught Ethan about tides and Sarah about constellations. The chair felt generous and new again. There is a point in every storm where people stop thinking about rescue and start thinking about blame. We arrived at that point on a Sunday afternoon. Ethan accused Sarah of distracting him with her chaos. Sarah accused Ethan of borrowing without asking when they were teenagers and said nothing in his hands ever stayed whole. Mary accused both of them of noise while she was trying to protect the family's future. They all accused the world of being unfair. The world, busy with other errands, did not attend the meeting. I remained the only silent vote in the room. It amused me how quickly they forgot the first vote had made me the world's quietest winner. I began taking evening walks. Not far. Around the block. Past the house with the trimmed hedges whose owner watered at dusk in socks. Past the cracked driveway where a child practiced free throws with a stubborn dedication I admired. Walking cleared the dust in my lungs. It let me think of next steps without the distraction of their voices. I did not need to hurry. They did that for me. On one of those walks, I passed the building where Mary's colleague parked his car. He had a flashy model with a vanity plate that screamed a joke about success. He was not careful with his schedule. People who expect the world to move for them do not learn to move quietly. I noted the hours his car came and went. I noted a coffee shop where he lingered on a bench outside, laughing too hard into his phone. I sat across the street on a low wall and learned his laugh from a distance. I did not take pictures. I carried a better camera. Memory is unhackable. When the third envelope left my hand, this one for a board member on the client side, I noticed my handwriting looked steadier than it had in years. The board member lived behind jargon, but he was still human. Humans are simple creatures when embarrassment knocks. He would not think of me when he opened the envelope. He would think of himself. That was enough. By now, the cracks had their own map. Sarah's debt had grown legs and followed her into every room. Ethan's margin call had turned into a chain of smaller humiliations, each one clinking against the next with a cheerful sound only he could hear. Mary's review had sprouted branches: compliance, client trust, reputational risk. Branches cast shade. Shade kills flowers if you leave them too long. They stopped eating at the same time. They stopped laughing in the same room. Their phones replaced each other's faces. The house became a collection of islands separated by narrow rivers no one wanted to bridge. I drifted between the islands like a fisherman who knew the currents. I threw no nets. Fish were leaping into buckets all on their own. One evening, Sarah stood at the sink longer than the dishes required. She stared at her reflection in the window as if it might say something kind. Ethan sat at the table with a spreadsheet glare that could not bend reality. Mary stood in the doorway with a folder she did not want anyone to see. 3 people, 3 storms, 1 roof. The math finally made sense. I poured tea and thought about the lazy cruelty of their vote. It had been so easy for them to erase me with raised hands. Now the hands they needed were busy holding their own lives together. None left to push me aside. The best part of watching cracks spread is not the sound. It is the quiet between each fracture. In that quiet, the truth speaks plainly. The truth said they built their house on the idea that I would always stay soft. They were wrong. I went to bed that night with the satisfaction of a craftsman who knows the frame is shifting exactly as planned. There would be no need for hammers later. The weight of their choices would do the heavy work for me. I only had to keep tightening the screws. Morning would bring the next turn. A client's email. A platform's final notice. A door that closed with administrative courtesy. I slept well for the first time in months, not because I loved the ruin, but because for once, the ruin was honest. There's a stage in every hunt where the prey stops running in straight lines. They stumble, panic, and turn on each other. That's when you tighten the trap. That's when you make the cage look like it built itself. By the time Sarah's debts boiled over, Ethan's investments collapsed, and Mary's career began cracking under the weight of whispered scandal, I didn't have to lift a single hammer. They were already tearing down the house brick by brick. My only job was to make sure the rubble fell the way I wanted. Sarah was the loudest. 20 years old, but screaming like a child denied candy at the store. She paced the hallways, calling one friend after another, begging, bargaining, lying. Her voice rose, broke, fell, rose again. One night she slammed her phone onto the counter so hard the back cover popped off. "They're threatening me now," she muttered, eyes wild, hair sticking to her face. "They said they'll come to the house." Perfect. Fear does more damage than fists ever could. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Ethan sneered at her, called her careless, told her she'd ruined the family's name. Sarah threw back venom, accusing him of being no better, a gambler who thought numbers were magic spells. They shouted so loud the neighbor's dog barked. Mary told them both to stop, but her voice was thin, trembling, like she didn't believe she had authority anymore. Authority requires respect. Respect had left this house months ago. I just sipped my tea, letting the steam hide my smile. Then came Ethan's spiral. His so-called portfolio had been nothing more than sandcastles built at low tide. When the water rolled in, his castles vanished. Margin calls. Overdrafts. Final warnings from faceless corporations that didn't care about his excuses. I watched him sit at the table, head in his hands, muttering to himself, refreshing the same screen over and over as if numbers would magically change out of pity. His pride was gone. What was left was desperation, and desperation makes people careless. He asked Mary for help one night, his voice cracking, his hands shaking. But Mary had no help left to give. Her own world was crumbling. She was no longer the queen at the head of the table. She was the accused, the suspect, the woman whispered about in boardrooms she used to command. The firm she had given her best years to had turned its eyes on her with suspicion. Clients backed away. Colleagues avoided her. She wore makeup thicker, smiles thinner. But I saw it, her crown had slipped, and she couldn't fix it. That was when I pulled the ropes tighter. I made a second quiet call to Sarah's friend, urging him not just to demand repayment but to press harder, louder, to rattle her cage until she couldn't sleep. I left another anonymous note at Mary's firm, this one with dates and details sharper than before. And as for Ethan, I nudged one more domino. An old contact of mine at the bank, someone who owed me a favor, slipped him just enough truth to freeze Ethan's last lifeline of credit. The beauty of it all? They still never suspected me. To them, I was a ghost, too weak, too old, too irrelevant. While they screamed at each other, I floated quietly in the corner, watching my invisible strings pull tighter and tighter. The house transformed. No laughter. No chatter. No sound of forks clinking at the table. Sarah barricaded herself in her room, whispering late-night apologies into her phone. Ethan spent hours with his laptop, his face pale blue from the glow, his eyes bloodshot, muttering curses at numbers that no longer obeyed him. Mary paced the hallway like a prisoner, phone pressed to her ear, nodding to voices that weren't on her side anymore. And me. I became the stillness in the storm. Sitting in my chair, listening, collecting, savoring. There was one evening I'll never forget. Sarah burst out of her room, screaming at Ethan for stealing money from her purse. Ethan shouted back that he didn't need her scraps. Mary tried to silence them, but they were too far gone. For the first time since their vote, they looked at each other not as family but as enemies. I leaned back in my chair, watching their empire collapse from the inside. That was the moment I knew, the trap wasn't just tightening, it was closing. And when it finally snapped shut, I would be the only one left standing. There are moments in life when silence carries more weight than 1,000 words. When the truth doesn't need to be spoken, it bleeds into the room on its own, dripping from every corner until no one can ignore it. That moment finally came, on a night eerily similar to the one when they had voted me out of their family. The same dining table. The same chairs. But this time, the roles were reversed. Mary sat at the head again, but she looked nothing like the queen she once pretended to be. 52 years old, shoulders slumped, her hair tied back too tight as if pulling it might hold her face together. She had lost the glow of control. Instead, she carried the grey shadow of defeat. Her firm had started reviewing her status, and everyone knows what that means: death by paperwork, slow exile by reputation. Her phone, once buzzing with endless opportunities, now lay silent beside her plate, like even the device had abandoned her. Ethan, 22, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes hollow. His laptop sat closed in front of him, not because he wanted it to, but because there was no reason to open it anymore. His accounts were gone, drained like water through a sieve. His investments, his pride, his constant boasting, all reduced to a few polite emails telling him he no longer met the minimum balance requirement. His arrogance had vanished, replaced by a nervous twitch in his jaw. Sarah, only 20, sat curled into herself, scrolling her phone like it might magically produce the money she owed. Her debts had grown teeth, and those teeth were now at her door. The friend she owed had stopped being polite. Threats had entered the conversation. She trembled with every vibration of her phone, jumping at shadows, eyes darting to the window as though someone might already be standing outside. The three of them sat in silence, plates untouched, food growing cold. The air was heavy, not just with tension but with fear. The unity they once had, the unity they used to erase me from the family, was gone. Now, they didn't even look at each other. That was my cue. I pulled out my chair at the end of the table, the same chair where I had sat the night they voted. The wood creaked under me, loud in the silence. They looked at me then. For the first time in months, all three pairs of eyes turned in my direction. Not with annoyance. Not with cold indifference. But with something new. Fear. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. My silence was louder than their screams had been. Mary's eyes flickered, searching mine for an answer she didn't want to ask. Sarah's lips trembled, as though words might escape her if she let them. Ethan swallowed hard, the proud tilt of his chin gone, replaced by the realization of weakness. They didn't need me to confess. Deep down, they already knew. They knew who had pulled the threads. They knew who had whispered into the cracks. They knew who had been the ghost haunting them, waiting, watching, striking where it hurt most. The beauty of revenge isn't in the shouting or the gloating. It's in the quiet moment when your enemies finally realize you were the storm all along. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded calmly in front of me. Their eyes stayed on me, wide, pleading, terrified. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to lift a finger. I simply sat there, the shadow they had created, the ghost they thought they buried, the father and husband they erased. And now, the man who erased them first. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. Finally, I stood. Slowly. Deliberately. I pushed the chair back in, the scrape of wood on the floor echoing like thunder in the tense room. Without a word, I turned and walked out, leaving them to sit in the wreckage of the lives they had built on arrogance, greed, and betrayal. That was the final blow. Not an explosion. Not a fight. Just the heavy truth that everything had crumbled, and I was still standing. They had voted me out of their family. But I had erased their family altogether. I am 62 years old, and I live in the same house where my wife, my son, and my daughter once voted me out of their lives. The walls haven't moved. The roof hasn't changed. The furniture sits where it always has. But the air is different. It's mine again. Mary drifts in and out of the house now, a hollow figure with eyes that no longer carry certainty. The firm didn't fire her outright. They don't do it that cleanly. They bled her out slowly, one project removed, one client lost, until she was nothing more than a name on a payroll waiting to be erased. She spends more time in her room than anywhere else, clutching her phone like a lifeline that never rings. Ethan avoids my eyes. He walks around with his shoulders bent, no longer the arrogant young man who bragged about futures he didn't understand. His laptop sits untouched on his desk, dusty, like a gravestone for dreams that never were. I sometimes hear him at night, muttering into the dark, arguing with numbers that won't argue back. Sarah is quieter too. The laughter she used to flood the house with has dried up. Debt collectors don't care about pretty faces or excuses. She sits with her head in her hands, scrolling through her phone for salvation that never comes. She once looked at me with annoyance. Now, when our eyes meet, there's something else there, fear, shame, maybe both. And me. I sit in my chair, the same chair where they erased me, and I breathe. The silence that once suffocated me now feels like a crown. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I didn't fight for their love. I let their own hands tear themselves apart. They wanted me invisible. They got their wish. But this ghost learned how to haunt. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you.